Hi, I'm Kevin Grasso, the CEO and co-founder of Biblingo and the one responsible for all of the content.
Dr. Kevin Grasso, welcome to Exegetically Speaking. Or I should say welcome back to Exegetically Speaking. Kevin, it's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Your first time at the library. We're face-to-face. We're not over Zoom this time.
Yes, it is quite an incredible place to be, honestly,
Yeah.
at this library. I just saw some replicas of the Dead Sea Scrolls and it reminded me of good times in Israel. So
Yeah, now you spent a lot of time in Israel, right?
yeah, 5 years. So
So you know a little Hebrew after that.
just a little, yeah.
Just a little. More than just a little. Now, you said you were the CEO of Biblingo and one of the co-founders or founders.
Yeah.
For those who haven't heard of it, what is it exactly?
Yeah, so Biblingo is a software program designed to teach the biblical languages using the latest second language acquisition methods. So there's a whole field devoted to how to learn languages, and we're basically trying to incorporate all those methods to help people learn Greek and Hebrew the most efficient way possible. And so that involves learning vocabulary, right, through flashcards and spaced repetition and pictures and images and audio. So we have a lot of different tools to help you learn vocabulary, and then we have grammar to teach you the grammar of the biblical languages, to help you form sentences, and ultimately we want to get you into the text to read the Bible in a way that you are really reading the text and not just translating or glossing, but that you are understanding the Greek or Hebrew as it was meant to be understood and without recourse to another language like English or whatever other language.
You know, sometimes I remember learning the language that we would go from a flashcard that had a word like hippos on one side, and then on the other side it said horse, right? So we had to go through English to get access to the language. But in fact, your method just stops that and just said, let's go from our brains and what we see in the real world around us to the Greek word or the Hebrew word in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is exactly how a 5-year-old would have learned Greek and Hebrew back in the day, 2,000 years ago, right? They would have seen their parents or someone around them use the word hippos in the context of a horse. And then they would have had to do this calculation of, okay, what is this person referring to? Oh, it must be that animal over there that he's pointing at. And then they would have begun to associate the Greek word hippos with that referent in the world, right? And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, let's not just give you Greek to English, because we actually don't want you to be thinking in English when you're reading the Greek text. We want you to be thinking in Greek and thinking about what the biblical world is like as you read the biblical words. So that's why we're going basically from the biblical languages to the biblical world. And so our software is very picture and video based. And so we're trying to get you to think in the biblical world as much as possible. And then obviously we're pairing that with text that you can read ultimately, so that when you are reading the biblical text, you are thinking in the biblical world and constructing that world as you read.
I like the way that you put together the cultural piece with the language, because culture and language just belong together.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you've ever learned another language, you know that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, today we're going to talk about Romans chapter 3, verse 24, and maybe a little beyond that. But tell us a little bit, what are we looking at, Kevin, in Romans 3:24? What's going on here?
Oh, well, there are so many things that are going on. It's hard to
I know. You could write
a
dissertation on that one passage, right? But
yes, for
in
sure.
particular, 3:24. What's going on?
So, I mean, I did my PhD dissertation on righteousness words in biblical Hebrew. So while I was doing that, I kind of came up with a framework for how to look at these words in general. And you have, in 24, it starts with dikaiumenoi. And so the question is, how do we understand that word, right? I just have ESV pulled up alongside here, and it says, and are justified by his grace. Well, that's, one interpretation, right? And other people understand this to mean and are made righteous by his grace. And that difference is a significant difference. The Greek actually allows for both, but the question for us in any kind of context is, why would you have one meaning over the other, right? For words that can have multiple interpretations, our question is, what makes us think that we should have justified here and not made righteous, right? The ESV says justified, but there are many scholars that think here we're referring to believers that are becoming righteous, that are being transformed by his grace as a gift, right? Through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus.
So this isn't a one-time thing. Okay, you're justified. This is a process of being made right, being made, maybe justified is not the right word there, being made right, over time.
Right. Well, and that actually, the aspect does suggest that that is the case, right? Dikaiumenoi, is imperfective aspect, so it's something that is happening. And so that would be one indication, one hint that it's not justified, right? That's because justified is an act that happens in a moment, right? And so that is evidence against the SV's translation that, and it's just a suggestion that maybe there's more going on here. So I personally, again, you can really get into the weeds very quickly here. But what's special about this word is that it is actually built from an adjective, this verb. And you have a lot of these words in Greek. They are often words with the omicron ending, dikaio, right, in my pronunciation. But these kinds of words, their semantics of the verb is built off of the semantics of the adjective. And we do the same thing in English. In fact, justify is one such word, right, where you have just is an adjective, and then the if-I suffix turns an adjective into a verb. And our meaning for justify is built on our meaning for the adjective. So in order to figure out what's going on here with the verb, we should be looking at how the adjective is used in other places. So one really good example of this is, one very interesting in my opinion, is Romans 5:7. And this is pretty much never talked about in this verse. But what's interesting here is that there is a relationship between the person who is dikaios, right? Here's dikaiu. So it says, molis God hyper dikaiu tis apothanetai. So hardly will anyone ever die for a righteous person, right? But hyperga tu agathu tachatis kai tolma apothanein. So if we're just like ranking these two people, there's a person that's agathos, and there's a person that's dikaios. And the person that's agathos is above the person that's dikaios, right? So, hardly would anyone ever die for a righteous person, but maybe for a good person, someone would die, right? And so that is a very interesting example about what it tells us about the semantics of dikaios, at least in this case. It says that dikaios can basically mean innocent without bad. Good is something that's good, right? It's a positive quality. But in 7, it's very clear you have to interpret dikaios as without bad. And that's actually kind of the sense that we get with justified, right? If you are justified, then it means that the bad things are wiped away, right? Whereas made righteous, again in English, is not that. Being made righteous is to become good, right? Become a better person morally. And we have examples, clear examples. This doesn't really need to be debated, or this isn't debated. We have clear examples of dikaios meaning like good, and it's something very close to agathos. So the question is here in our text, which one do you have, right? Does it mean being justified or being made like basically innocent, or being made righteous, being made into a better person, right? So there are, again, it gets very complicated very quickly.
So if people want to know more about that, you've written about this, I'm sure.
Yes. So, my dissertation is probably inaccessible too. It's very difficult because I'm drawing on linguistics, and it's a whole different field than biblical studies.
Right. Yeah.
But it gives us tools to think about this problem, right? And the basic problem is, in the context of judgments where we have a standard, dikaios just means that standard is met. In the context of comparing like two people, for example, or saying someone's like general moral quality, Dikaios just means that someone has a positive moral quality. So either someone meets a standard or someone has a positive moral quality. So here, in our case, the really hard part about Romans 3:24 is that it can be interpreted either way based on or it's been argued for either way based on the context. But if you look at the immediately preceding verse, the question is, what is being talked about? Pantes gar hemarton, kai husteruntai tes doxes tuteo. So all sinned and lack the glory of God. So in this case, we're talking about people's moral character. Mm-hmm. We're actually not talking about their status. And we immediately run to status because we connect sin and status.
Well, we got a theology sort of built on that.
Exactly.
And so this text has to fit into that theology.
Right.
Rather than the text informing and maybe transforming our theology.
Right. And he will go on, Paul will go on, right, in 26 to talk about, okay, well, what does this do with God's justice? How does he show his justice? How is he just if he is going to, make righteous someone else? And so I think Paul does deal genuinely with past sins and innocence, and this is Romans 4, right? But the question is, in Romans 3, what is he doing? And I think it's very clear, given the previous, verse, right, which is the same sentence, that we actually are here still talking about sinners. And sinners are, of course, they are guilty. Those two ideas are connected. But the actual contribution of what it means to be a sinner is that you are morally bankrupt. And the idea here would be that Jesus transforms people by his grace freely through his redemption into people that are no longer like that.
Right.
And
we see people.
Right.
They're new creation.
Right, exactly.
To borrow 2 Corinthians.
And we see that, of course, in Romans 5 as well, and Romans 6.
Yeah.
So this isn't anything that would be earth-shattering theologically, but it is a different way to read this text than, say, the ESV, right? Where I don't think the translation justified is justified.
It's justified that way. Yeah. So those who are being now made right freely as this gift, formerly they were the sinners.
Yes.
Those who are in this state of lacking.
Yes.
In this place of lacking the glory of God. Great. It's a great reading of the text. Yeah.
And then he goes on, right? He still has to deal with the problem of former sins, and that's what he goes on to talk about, right? Okay, well, they can be made righteous. That's fine. But what about all the bad things they did before they were made righteous? And so that is Romans 4, right? That is a legitimate problem he's dealing with. But in the context of Romans 3 and everything preceding, he's dealing with the moral bankruptcy of humanity. And how do we fix that? It's through the redemption of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ has redeemed people so that they are now new creatures, right? And they live differently.
Great reading of this text. Dr. Kevin Grasso, thank you for being with us on Exegetically Speaking.
Thanks a lot for having me.
If you learned too much today and your head is hurting, there is one sure cure. That is to share this podcast with a friend. If you've never visited Wheaton College, I hope you'll make plans to do so. We have a wonderful campus all year round. And if biblical languages are your fancy, check out the MA and the BA program at Wheaton College. You can go to wheaton.edu, look for modern and classical languages, get started today. This is the day you want to do it, right? If you have questions or comments, if you just want to be in touch, please email us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks to all those who make this podcast possible. You know who you are. Until next time, thanks for listening.